Hello, thanks for having me. Tonight I will be talking about Amma. And so the title of my presentation is Mama is a Man. And so the subtitle I think will get you a little bit clear about what we're going to talk about, and that is gender and the goddess Śrī Nārāyaṇī of Śrī Puram. Should I move this down a bit? Good now? Better? Okay. All right, so before we actually get into this, I just want to poll the audience and see, whenever I say goddess, what do you think of? So to get the ball rolling, people from my classes, I see you out there, so I'm going to pick on you. So goddess, and you have a leg up also, because you know what I'm going to be talking about. Oh, I'm going to start calling on you. I will. All right, Dean. It's like class time now.
Like a female who has the same power as a god, like god divine traits.
Yeah, not a trick question. Perfect answer. Anybody else want to add something? Anybody? Oh, C's all around, C's. Okay. Okay, but that is actually what I wrote down. So a female deity, that is typically the way whenever you say goddess, it has a gendered connotation, right? And so this would be put next to, say, God, and that would have the male connotation to it. So that's what we will be examining tonight, this female connotation to the idea of a goddess. So whenever you think of goddesses, I don't know what mental image pops into your mind, but this is what mental image pops into my mind. So this is the goddess Cāmundi from Mysore. So my time in India, this is kept inside the palace of Mysore, and so this was the goddess that I saw every day. So this is one vision of a goddess that you could possibly have, and that is a female figure wearing a sari. And here she's seen as a warrior. She's fierce. You can see down at the bottom she's stabbing this demon with her trident, yet still keeps it all together and looks very, very regal at the same time. Here's another image that's very similar. This is more of a classical temple image of Durga slaying the buffalo demon. So again, you have a similar aspect here of the warrior goddess killing the buffalo. And actually, as I was thinking through my PowerPoint sitting there, I realized that I really always think about the warrior goddess, and so most of my images turn out to be very similar. Here's another one. And so if you're familiar with Hinduism and goddesses, this might be the image that pops into your mind, because Kali has been extremely important for Western understandings of Hinduism. So if your only basis of knowledge of Hinduism is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, this is the deity within that film. So when he's chanting Kali Ma, it literally means Kali the mother, Kali the mother. And so she is a bloodthirsty goddess, fierce goddess. You can see she's has the skirt of arms, human arms, a garland of human skulls, or here it's heads. She holds a severed head, her tongue is stained with blood. So a very vibrant, dynamic image of the goddess. But there are some that are more serene also. And so here is an image of the goddess Sarasvati. Sarasvati is seen as the goddess of learning. And so whenever you're in India or around a Hindu American, before a big exam, often Sarasvati would be the goddess that you would do puja to or you would pray to. And so it's also something you find very often in professors' offices. And here you have this image, and it's different than the last one we saw. So here this is a reprint of a lithograph. But now we have an image that actually has a woman. So it's a photograph of a woman posing as the goddess. And so this gets us to an interesting idea that we're going to have to deal with tonight, and that is, what is the relationship between a goddess, a female deity, and a woman? So here there's some connection that's being made. The artist here is drawing that there's a similarity. Add a few arms and the right decorations, and then you can bridge the gap between the two. However, we also know that within Hindu history, goddesses often manifest within this world in the form of a woman. And so this picture is of Anandamayi Ma, who lived from 1896 to 1982. And this is a relatively common thing that goes on. The goddess will take on the form of of a woman. And this is interesting when people start to look at the backgrounds of these women, because you see some very similar motifs in their life story. You find out that oftentimes they were married very young, and they resisted the marriage, were married anyway, but then never consummated it, and instead went into a state of renunciation and refused to have sex with their husband. And so it's kind of a protest against it, but it's also a way of showing the strength of the goddess. And so this particular goddess, Anandamai, was not her given name, but one given to her by her devotees, which means really the one full of bliss. And so she was known for being in completely blissed out states all the time. And so after she was married, her and her husband moved to this one city that's very important for its kingly history. And everyone started to notice that she was constantly sitting much like this in a very, in the lotus position, and she was in another state. She was almost in a trance because she was so happy and full of bliss. And she would give teachings that were kind of Gnostic, maybe. They're very cryptic, and they would always be aimed at understanding happiness. And so you see all these women that have been declared manifestations of goddesses, or the embodiment of the goddess on earth, often have this association with trance states. And so sometimes they're more active, not always blissed out, but sometimes they're able to give prophecies of doom and gloom for what's going to happen to the people. And so I can remember actually once in Mysore going to a goddess temple for a festival, and a woman came in, became possessed by the goddess. She was from this caste that is already quasi divine already, and she gave a prophecy to everyone: if they didn't return to pure devotion of the goddess, then no rain would come. And then subsequently told some women they weren't going to get married unless they became better goddess devotees. And so it's a voice, it's a platform through which women are able to speak whenever they're seen as the manifestation or the embodiment of the goddess. And there's also times in India to where the goddess manifests not as a woman, but through the body of a man. So here, if you look closely, you'll see that all these figures in the forefront are actually males, but they're dressed as a woman. So this is called putting on Śrī Vesham, which means the ornamentation of a woman. So this is at Tirupati, which is an extremely important South Indian holy site, and this is during the Gangama Jatra, which is a lower caste festival in celebration of the goddess Ganga. So anytime I add this Amma, it simply means mother. And so it's a cognate with the English term mama. And I'm from the South, and so that's what I call my mother, so I think it's a nice alliterated title for this talk. And so the idea that whenever you're a goddess, you're somehow associated with the fertility of womanhood, and it's associated back with the earth, and so all the things that we also saw earlier in Professor Seat's lecture. So in this particular image, we have a very special case. This happens one day out of the year during this special festival where the goddess has become ugra. It's oftentimes translated as like fierce, but literally it means heavy, too much to bear. And so the goddess goes through the whole year receiving regular gifts, regular devotion, but this happens as it's starting to heat up. And so just like everybody else in India, it's starting to get hot. You went from the cooler season, and now everybody's kind of getting miserable. The goddess also starts to get a little miserable. Starts to get a little bit cranky. And she starts to start acting out maybe. And one way that she acts out is through another of her manifestations that we'll talk about a little bit more in depth a little bit later. And that's through the manifestation of pox. And so like smallpox, chickenpox. That's one way that the goddess manifests. And so all of these diseases that manifest as sores on the skin are actually seen as manifestations of the goddess. So each little pock is. And so if you look very closely on this image, you'll see that they've actually drawn little pocks on themselves with paint. And so in this moment, this one day out of the year, in order to alleviate the stress on the goddess and to make her happy for the rest of the year, these men take a vow to take part of that burden, and they become goddesses for a day. And so they take on not only the clothing of women, but take on the divinity of the goddess. However, this it's not right for society. It's not dharmic for, again, all those that are in my class. So the idea of dharma is so important within Hindu society. This is the guide for how you ought to live. And it's not only just how you ought to live, but it will maintain all of society. That society has to have certain rules in order to operate. And one of the most basic rules is that there needs to be both men and women. If you only had male or only had female, things would fall apart. But part of this, the undergirding understanding of this particular manifestation of the goddess, is that at our core, though, we are all actually feminine. And so we're going to talk about the philosophy that's going to back this up a little bit later. But this is called Swashakti Rupani. And so it simply means that your own true nature, your own true form is Shakti. And so this is a term, sorry Nate, I'm moving around a lot. I'm going to try to come back over here. Just post up, sorry. Okay, so this is a term that we're going to see constantly, and that's the term Shakti. Shakti is a feminine term in Sanskrit, and so in Sanskrit you have 3 genders. So English, we don't have this, but a lot of other language that we know some have genders. And so in Sanskrit you have a masculine gender, a feminine gender, and a neuter. And so you have the possibility for all 3. And so often you get the essence of something based in the linguistic gender. So Shakti is linguistically feminine. And so it also is feminine in its nature. And Shakti is simply translated as energy. This is the energy, the feminine energy that actually invigorates everything. And so anything that you do, anything that you want to do, anything someone else does, all of that is made possible through these power waves that go through all the cosmos, which are rooted in the feminine. So the concept of Swashakti Rupani is the fact that at your very essence, your core essence, you are actually completely made up of this feminine Shakti, this feminine energy. Okay, now let's go move back to this goddess. So now we've seen a few of the possibilities within India of goddesses. Now we're going to transition and talk about this specific goddess, Śrī Nārāyaṇī. This is the goddess that's the major one under discussion. So if you look at this image, it seems like a pretty standard set image of a Vaishnava or relating to Vishnu image. So you have some key iconographical elements such as the conch and the chakra that clues someone who's familiar with these traditions and immediately that this comes from a Vaishnava context, one of the major devotional traditions in India. This is also seen as to be one of the more serene, more laid-back traditions. Usually it doesn't break the mold a whole lot. It's seen as more conservative, maybe. Typically, when people say Vaishnava, it also becomes a shorthand for vegetarian. And actually, it's a pretty small percentage of Hindus are actually vegetarian, so it's another way of just saying this is a conservative movement. So when we're talking about Śrī Nārāyaṇī, this is the manifestation of Nārāyaṇa, Vishnu, as female. However, what's interesting about the manifestation that I'm going to talk about is that it does not look like this, but she looks like this. This is Amma. This is Mala in Śrī Puram, Tamil Nadu. Now, I was very unfamiliar with Amma whenever I was in India. My research is, as I said, in Mysore on Cāmundi, dealing with medieval imperial rhetoric. And so I was actually tracking these war routes that the army that I study was taking. And one of them took me to a city called Vellore. And while I was there, I just went into a coffee shop, or coffee stall really, and was having my coffee, and then someone saw me and said, "Oh, you must be here for Amma." and I had no clue what he was talking about. I imagined there must be a temple nearby. And so I asked, what is your Amma? Because every city really has their own Amma, their own mama. And he told me that Amma was outside of the city limits, and if I kept on my motorcycle trip, didn't turn where I was supposed to, but went a little bit farther, I would find Amma. So I thought that this was probably a good thing for me to do, an auspicious, fortuitous meeting with this man. So I went to Śrī Puram, and I got to meet Amma. So today what I'm going to do in this lecture is you're going to meet Amma. I'm going to tell you the story of Amma, and when he realizes that he's actually the manifestation of the goddess. Then we're going to talk a bit, not too much though, about goddess-centered devotion. And so the forms that goddess-centered devotion have taken within this context. Then we're going to spend a little more time talking about Shakta philosophy. And so this is philosophy that grows out of this idea of Shakti, or this feminine primordial energy. And we'll see through that why Amma can actually be a man. So now let's transition a little bit to Amma's biography. So Amma was born named Satish, actually. So there's no denial of his male form. Born to very conservative Vaishnava parents. His parents were extremely pious. They were always doing puja. They kept all of the festivals. And so they were proper conduits through which the divine could manifest. They lived in a town called Malaikodi, which literally means the end of the mountains, or maybe the foothills. So I think we can visualize sort of the geography if we think of Tucson and the foothills. And when he was born, there's typically within stories of divine figures something special about the birth. And so when he is born with namam on his forehead. You've probably noticed this from Indians that you've met, or if you've learned about Hinduism, about forehead marks. That this is important for distinguishing yourself as Hindu. Now here it typically takes the form of just a single dot. Usually something like a bejeweled, bedazzled thing that's stuck onto the forehead. However, in India, this is one primary way that you can tell what sectarian tradition someone is from. And so whenever they go to temple, they'll have a certain forehead mark. One for Vaishnavism looks like almost like a W, and it's a stylized footprint of Trivikrama, which is a form of Vishnu. And then for Shaivas, you'll have 3 stripes across the forehead. And if you're a Shakta or a goddess devotee, you'll also have a big red dot in the middle of it. And so you can tell immediately what tradition someone's from. And there's subcategories of all these also. So when he is born with that Vaishnava mark on his forehead, that stylized footprint on his forehead, which it says in his biography, there's a thing called a Stella Purana, or the history of the place, that you can still see it. In all the images, I haven't been able actually to pick it up, but they say it's still there, that you can see that forehead mark on Amma's head. So immediately, people knew that this baby was special. Some people thought that the parents had put it on there to try to dupe people to get money, and so they washed the child's forehead vigorously, and it stayed on. So everyone realized that this child was special. But there's degrees of being special, and so that sort of specialness went away over time. However, once they got him home and other kids started walking, he wasn't all that keen actually on walking and learning to play. Instead, he wanted to walk to be able to go over to the home altar and take a picture of the goddess, and would grab the picture of the goddess and stare at it. So immediately also people started to realize that he was religiously inclined, if you want to call it that. And so not only would he hold the temple, but every opportunity he could get, he would go with his landlady who would take him to temple. And then it grew from there, from where he was going to temple and watching the priest do puja, or the ritual worship of the deity, to where he started doing it himself. And this is highly irregular. This is not something that is usually done. There's a very strict hierarchy within the temple worship process. So this is out of the ordinary. Out of the ordinary that he would do it, out of the ordinary that he'd be allowed to do it. And so everyone knew that he was religiously inclined, but didn't know quite what to make of it. Then another event happens. They are at their home that they had just had built, he and his parents, and they were having a housewarming ceremony, which are huge in the Indian context. It's a very important ritual whenever you open a new home because it's inviting the deities of the different directions to bless the home. They noticed after they built their house that all of a sudden an anthill had popped up. And so this is the anthill. And so anthills in India, the ants are a little different, and so it becomes this very hard cone. And so this is what it eventually looked like. And so they saw this, and anthills are known for being the abode of the goddess. Their goddess takes on the form of a snake, actually. So as a snake comes in, goes into the anthill, and makes that their abode. So this is good to have the goddess, but pretty inauspicious for a housewarming. So they call the snake charmer, and the snake charmer comes. And the way the snake charmer figures out if there's a snake in there or not, they get very close to the ground and they smell. And the snake's supposed to have a smell of jasmine. And so he smells and can't sense anything, but decides that he's going to charm the snake out anyway. And so as he starts to say his incantations, then all of a sudden a burst of energy shoots him backwards. And so he gets up thinking that it could be just a strange anomaly and tries it again. Same thing, bends over to start reciting his incantations, and a burst of energy shoots him backwards again. And so the snake charmer says, this is obviously not a normal snake. This is the abode of the goddess. And according to Amma's biography, the snake charmer renounces his profession and becomes a devotee of the goddess from that point forward. So at this point, people are starting to realize that something is going on. And the whole time when this is all, everyone's watching this unfold because it's kind of the show. Anytime there's a snake charmer, it's an interesting thing to watch. So there was one in my backyard when I lived in India, and so everyone came to watch the snake charmer get it out. So everyone's watching, except for Satish, who would just stare off into the sky with a knowing grin. And so after all this happened, they went back to Satish, and they asked him what was there, and he said, confirming what the snake charmer had said, that this is officially the abode of the goddess. However, Satish's mother was a teacher in Vellore, which is about 20 kilometers away, and so they couldn't stay there. It was too far for her to commute every day, so after the housewarming ceremony, they moved to Vellore. But Satish was drawn to this anthill, to this snake hill. And so every weekend, after he would get out of school, so he's in high school by this point, he would get on a bus, and he would go all the way back to Malaikoti. So he would go to Malaikoti, go to the anthill, and worship, and perform puja, over and over again. So he did this for about a year, and then all of a sudden, one day when he was coming home, he started getting very fevered, started feeling very ill. And then he laid down in bed to go to sleep, and he started smelling the smell of camphor. And so camphor is important within the ritual worship of Hinduism because it's lit and put in front of the face of the deity. And so it has this very menthol smell to it, and it also gives off a high flame. And so it's enjoyable to the deity. And so as he lay there in bed, he smelled camphor and got up to go see if his parents were doing puja. They were doing worship. And he went into the room, and they had already gone to sleep. No camphor had been lit. He wakes up his mother up anyway and decides to ask, have you been burning camphor? Because the smell was just so strong. And she said, no, Satish, I have not been burning camphor. Go back to bed. So he goes back to bed. Then all of a sudden, he starts to notice pox developing on him. So all these boils start to pop up, especially on his face. And so if I go back to the image of Amma, it's hard to see, but there are scars still on on his face. A lot of younger people may not have seen the smallpox scar, but a lot of us who are older have them on our arm from whenever we've been inoculated. So it leaves a pretty interesting scar, a little dimple. And so he gets covered in these pox, but of course they don't hurt him, but he has a very high fever, and this fever winds up being extremely transformative. So while he's in his fevered state, another woman in this village of Malaikodi gets a message from the goddess. The goddess comes to her and says, at this moment, the goddess has manifested in Malaikodi. And of course, she has no clue what's going on over in Satish's house, and so doesn't really think about it that much. However, as he becomes well, he's completely changed. No longer is he just interested in going to the temple and performing puja. Now he starts to ask for puja to be performed to him. So the first thing that he does as he's becoming well is he asks his grandmother to take turmeric water and start to bathe him. Now it's an interesting request because of the properties of turmeric. The way I first came across turmeric when I was in India was as a balm or a salve whenever you have a sore. So it's something that's commonly put on oxen who are pulling the plow all the time and get sores on their hump. And so it's put on there to soothe the pain. And so it's plausible that he wanted the soothing, the cooling nature of the turmeric to be poured over him. However, this special mixture of turmeric and water is also what's used to bathe the images of the deity. So in temples, part of the daily rituals, in the morning and in the evening, the image of the deity, whether it's metal or stone, is bathed in several different substances, one of them being turmeric. So by asking for this bath in turmeric, he's asking to be cooled physically and also starting to reenact the imagery of the divine. So after his grandmother bathes him, then he asks for neem. Neem is another medicinal plant in India. It's often used to brush your teeth. And so if you go to India, one of the common flavors of toothpaste will be neem sometimes. And it has all sorts of, again, cooling properties. And so it could also be that he wanted neem to be able to cool himself. But within the goddess tradition, this is one of the deity's favorite snacks. And so when women typically go into trances of the goddess, they'll ask for neem to be brought to them. And so they'll eat whole lemons and whole neem leaves to be part of the soothing and cooling process. So by asking for this neem, now the grandmother knows that something's going on. So she asks, Satish, why are you demanding all these things of me? And this is when he first proclaims his own divinity. He says, grandmother, do you think I'm just some kid playing pranks on you? That I just want you to bring me things to cool me down? I am the manifestation of the goddess on earth. And so from there on out, people started looking at him a little bit differently. His exact quote is, do you think I'm a child playing pranks? I am the divine mother ruling the entire universe. So he returns to Malaikodi, which all of a sudden gets a prefix, Tiru Malaikodi, which is in Tamil similar to the term Śrī that we already saw in front of Nārāyaṇī, which means auspicious, glorious. And so now as the manifestation of the goddess is present, it's not just any normal city, but now it is a glorious city because it shines with the light of the divine. So he returns to Tirumalaikodi, which is also called Śrī Puram, which is the term that I used in the title, which means the city of Śrī, the city of glory. And Śrī is important also because it's a feminine term. Also the name of the goddess Lakshmi. So the city of Lakshmi, the city of divine glory. There's a lot of interesting linguistic things going on here that relates the divine feminine back to the situation. I'm going to have to speed up a little bit. Okay, so he returns and he decides to build a temple around the abode of the goddess. So you can see this very small temple has been constructed. And about a year passes, so he does this in 1992. And then in 1993, they have a ceremony in which Amma says something miraculous is going to happen. And so a bunch of people come, and they do start off the ceremony very normally. So you have a group of prepubescent girls carrying thalis, or these offerings. And so in South India, typically weddings, any village festival has a very similar way of starting off. And so they start doing their offerings, and he says, by the time we get to the end, there's something amazing is going to happen. They get to the last offering, the girl pours out her offering, and from that, this starts to grow from the earth. You can't really see, it's covered in flowers, but it's a stone. It's a linga. So it's called a Swayambhu linga. So a linga is the aniconic image of Shiva. And so Shiva is often paired with Shakti. And so when you have Shiva, Shakti together, this is one way of talking about the completeness of the universe, both male and female aspects. So to make the temple complete, they needed the image of Shiva. And so now this is called either the Shrine of the Snake Hill or sometimes the Shrine of the Swayambhu Linga. It's interesting that we have an image of Shiva because he comes from a sectarian Vaishnava tradition. So this would be like having maybe Protestant and Catholic mixed together. And so within this one shrine, there's two different traditions being exhibited. And so here you also see that a face, a mukha of the goddess has been put on the anthill to show that it's the divine feminine. And you also have the sari being placed on the anthill itself. All right, so now we know about the goddess. Eventually, he becomes wildly popular in Tamil Nadu. And it's, even though no attention has been paid to this goddess in the Western world, so many devotees in Tamil Nadu are devoted to Amma. So much so that he has constructed a new temple that's made of gold. And so it's, if you Google Śrī Puram Golden Temple, you'll see this beautiful, huge golden temple that has been erected through the funds given by devotees. Okay, but now let's talk about exactly what goddess Amma is. Because we know that the name Śrī Nārāyaṇī is who is manifested, but Śrī Nārāyaṇī is a female version of ultimate reality. And so you have to dig a little deeper into Amma's biography to find out exactly how they're conceiving of Śrī Nārāyaṇī within this tradition. So if you go in and start looking, all of a sudden you find different descriptions, and that is that he is the manifestation of three goddesses in one. And that's Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, and Mahasarasvati. These are not the same deities as Kali, who we saw earlier holding the severed head, or Saraswati that we saw the photograph of, or Lakshmi. These are unmanifest forms of the goddess. So when you drop the Maha, which means great, and just talk about the other goddesses, they are manifested. They have arms, they have physicality, they have a shape and a form. While we see the shape and the form of these, this is because we can't think in unmanifest terms. And so this is to help guide us toward it. But this is actually before anything actually takes root. It's before thought even becomes a conscious process. And so whenever he says that he is the manifestation of these three deities, this is equivalent to saying that he is the manifestation of the goddess as Brahman. And so this term Brahman, those of you in my class know it, but for those that don't, this is the term for ultimate reality. All that is, all that exists in its truest form is this Brahman. And so the goddess that Amma is a manifestation, incarnate form, in physical form, of the most abstract divine that you could possibly imagine. So how does this happen? I'm really going to have to speed up. So how does this work? Well, to understand exactly how this tradition is rooted in a philosophical tradition, you have to go a little bit previous. And so I'm going to speed through this slide. There's something called Samkhya philosophy. This is the oldest extant philosophy from India. So within Samkhya philosophy, you have the idea of Purusha as pure consciousness. Purusha is simply translated as man. So if you're in India, you go to the bathroom, you're a guy, I would go into Purusha. So again, we're seeing these importance of gendered terms. Now, the other part that's important for all of existence and all of creation is Prakriti. Prakriti is a female term, or a female gendered term. It's often translated as nature, which is a little insufficient because it is all matter and all energy. And so everything that we experience comes from this feminine side. So within Samkhya philosophy, when these two come together, they produce everything. And so here is a nice little chart that we don't have time to go over. But if you look up here, you have this Mula Prakriti, before everything is manifest, and you have Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas in equilibrium. That's Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, and Mahasaraswati, way up here. But within Samkhya philosophy, that is not the end-all be-all. You don't want to actually be here in all of this. The whole goal is to get back, to something. What are we getting back to? You want to get back to pure consciousness. You want to transcend everything. So this is the oldest extant philosophy. Now, Shakta philosophy, or goddess-centered philosophy, grows out of this. And it takes these two concepts again, Purusha and Prakriti, and it rearranges them. And says no longer is the idea to get back to Purusha. No longer is there this dichotomy. But in fact, Prakriti is the universe. It's monistic in its very core. And so whenever you think about getting back, because the goal is always to transcend this world of suffering and flux, you go back to just Prakriti. You go back to an unmanifest form of everything. Matter, energy, and consciousness. So what is this then? What is all of this that we are manifest into? Well, according to Shakta philosophy, that we are all part of this very first, this primordial feminine Prakriti. And that this feminine Prakriti also exists as the great goddess. And the goal for us then is to be able to realize that we are that divine feminine. However, we can't immediately grasp it because of this really important term, Maya. Maya means a lot of different things depending on what sectarian tradition you're in. But within Shakta philosophy, this is the goddess wants to play with you. That she wants to get you to engage with her. And so what she does is she makes us think that we're all different. And one of the main things that she uses to trick us up is this stuff that we're so attached to, our bodies, our minds. And so we get attached to this and we start to think through all of these differences as being more and more important. And so I think, that I am, because I look at my biological sex, I think I am male, I am masculine. And this is a way that I engage in that play with the goddess, because ultimately, within Shakta philosophy, all of us, male, female, are none of this. We're all actually coming from the divine feminine. And so that is how Mama can be a man. All right. The end. Right on time.